Sean of RAWS Select Music, and today I'm finally getting into that video that I've been talking about for a while, and that is breaking down my process for making a DJ mix and sort of explaining my reasons, mostly excuses, as to why it takes me so damn long to finish a DJ mix. I thought this might be sort of an interesting topic because I don't think a lot of people really understand at least my thought process when it comes to making a DJ mix, and why there's actually a lot more to it than just slapping my favorite songs together and trying to transition them as smoothly as possible. There's actually a little bit more of a mindset, a philosophy, and an approach that goes into it that isn't quite as straightforward as you might think. So without further ado, let me get into the steps that go into making a DJ mix. So for me, there's really 5 steps that go into making a DJ mix. The first one being selection, picking the music that I want to put into the mix. Step 2 for me is the initial recording process plus playback, where I actually listen to what I've recorded. Step 3, I call it seeking perfection. This tends to be the most time-consuming part of making the mix. Number 4 is editing. And finally, step 5, coming to terms with what I've recorded and really just accepting any sort of minute flaws that might still exist in the mix. So now that I've explained what my 5 steps are, allow me to go into a little bit more detail and elaborate a little bit further on each one of the steps. So let's come back to selection real quick, and I want to try to go into a little bit of detail on each little section. So with selection, this is easily the second most time-consuming part of putting a mix together. So it's hard to tell from this static shot here, but I have about 800 records in my collection, and as much as that seems like that would work to my advantage, it's actually quite a big hindrance. The reason being is there are a lot of possibilities, and it's easy to get bogged down in all those possibilities. So starting from a really sort of wide scope, I really have to narrow my focus down as much as possible. And that's why it takes so long. I think in terms of genre, energy, tempo, and with tempo, I'll usually start the mix off very, very slow and then slowly speed it up at the, try to get my finger in the frame right there, in usually finish the mix at a high tempo. There you go. And just because it's at high tempo doesn't mean that it's energy. And in terms of the energy of the mix, and in terms of my selection for tracks, I am not that focused on putting together a dance mix. The selection of songs that I usually use are of course songs that I really enjoy, but they're also, I feel like it, in the most ambiguous terms, are trying to express something that I feel. Whether it's music that I think needs to be heard, or if I'm feeling a particular emotion, or if, well, it pretty much just comes down to those 2 things. And then as a whole, if I feel like I've done my job right, I feel like those songs should come together and say something about me. If anything, it's just a way for me to show off the music that I collect and hopefully maybe get you interested, the listener, in some music that you had never heard before. So after I've collected all of my songs, and usually under that sort of loose banner that I just talked about, I'll move to stage 2. Now stage 2 is the initial recording process, and also playback, but I'll get into that a little bit later. The initial recording process is actually probably where the mix becomes the most fun, because this is where I'm the least serious and most playful with putting the mix together. So after I've got a decent enough songs selected, it's interesting because usually a lot of times I will start the initial recording process before I have all the songs that I want to put into the mix. And that's usually because when I start doing the initial recording, it's a very start and stop process. Listen, record, listen to it again, think about what I want to put onto the mix, and usually this will go on for a little while. So stage 3 and stage 4 are actually sort of interconnected. So stage 3, as I said, was seeking perfection, and stage 4 was the actual editing of the mix. And I'll tell you why the two things are sort of interconnected. But first, I need to give you a little bit of an idea as to why seeking perfection, or basically doing a second run through of the mix, is easily the most disheartening, discouraging, and ultimately where my, as one of my friends put it, superhuman skill for procrastination really starts coming into play. So when I do the second run through of the mix, I'm trying to get it as close to perfection as humanly possible. Now, even though in the end, I'll usually still keep some mistakes, some funky transitions, and some audio issues in there just so I have a reference point, and also I have something to edit small sections, small corrected sections of the mix onto. This is ultimately where I start getting the most frustrated, because in some instances I will not let a bad transition stand, and I will go back and re-record the same 2 songs, trying to transition them into each other, and ultimately feel like they just don't want to work. Now, maybe during the initial recording I got them to work, but when I'm doing the second draft, for some reason I can't make that lightning strike twice. This happens all the time. And when you're being sort of critical and you're creating something of your own, it's really easy to get discouraged because something isn't working and you've gotten it to work before. But ultimately, persistence pays off, and eventually I will get that second draft. From there, I will start recording the little chunks of the second draft that weren't perfect and really trying to tighten them up. This part can be just as frustrating and just as disheartening, because this is really where, as I was saying before, where you're really focusing with sort of laser-like focus on 2 particular songs and really trying to get them to be the best transition that you can make them. And that means sometimes doing it over and 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 over, you get the point, until it works. And it can be really time consuming. It can be pretty hair raising. As you can tell, I'm already losing some hair, and I have no doubt in my mind that some of that has come from genetics. It has nothing to do with making a DJ mix. You're serious? You think this is bullshit? It's genetics. But let's get into stage 4, the editing process and how it sort of correlates with stage 3. So, as you may have already guessed, as I talked about in the last part, most DJs don't record their mix as in one shot. It's just too time consuming to do it that way. Plus, you don't have as much control, especially over your track-to-track volume. It's easier to balance it if you balance the audio if you are recording your mix from song to song. Me personally, I need the whole framework for me already laid out, and it's easier once that once I have the big picture, I can start working smaller and focusing on those smaller, those finer details. So as I stated before, once I've got the general sort of framework for the mix figured out and I've got my second draft recording, I'll go in and start taking small sections that need to be fixed. It might just be a transition between two songs. It might be a small quarter of the mix, but regardless, I'll find a song that was recorded at 0 pitch, and 0 pitch means where the record is at its intended recorded speed. It's not sped up, it's not slowed down, it's exactly how it was recorded. I'll probably even show you a little video of what that looks like. And from there, I will use that as my starting song and record up to another song that was also at 0 pitch, because that means if I need to start the mix over again from that point, that's another song that I can start from. As long as the song was finished at 0 pitch, and generally as I'm mixing, I try to keep my tracks as close to 0 pitch as possible, because it just makes it that much easier when I'm doing the editing process. So I don't have to rack my brain to figure out what pitch was this at when I was recording the mix. So that's actually another tip that you might want to take home for all you DJs out there who are recording with vinyl. So ultimately, I will record that small part, and then digitally I will edit it into the second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever draft that I'm working on, and just make sure that it's as seamless as possible. And also, if and when it's possible, if the volume was a little bit off, I'll try to do any audio corrections at this point as well. I tend not to spend as much time on this part, because when a mix is all put together, this is really, really, really difficult to do. And I tend to, by this stage, once I'm editing the tracks together, I'm already at stage 5. And stage 5, as I told you before, is acceptance. Much like the 5 stages of grief, stage 5 for me is coming to terms and accepting that the mix will never be entirely perfect. But usually by this point, the editing's finished. I'd say almost 90% of all the mistakes or sort of lousy transitions have been ironed out. And usually I'm in a position where even the smallest mistake is it's so hard to notice that only somebody who, well, me, listening to my own work, I can immediately spot my own flaws. But for the average person, generally it's a little less obvious for them. But ultimately, during this stage, I will say, you know what? I'm fine with the mix the way it is, and that's when I'll upload it to SoundCloud or Mixcloud, or start making CDs to pass out to people at events. Yes, I still make mix CDs. I actually think, yes I do. Get that out. Have one of my mix CDs right here. And this one's up on Mixcloud. You can listen to it yourself. But yeah, that's pretty much it. This ended up getting a lot longer-winded than I expected. But hopefully you found some things kind of interesting about this. It wasn't as technical as I expected, but I think even just through giving you the sort of philosophical background of what goes into a DJ mix, you might have found, maybe gained a little bit more appreciation for the work and effort that goes into, or at least on my end, what goes into making a DJ mix. Let me know if you thought this video was interesting. Let me know if you would like me to do something a little bit more tutorial oriented. I definitely want to branch out, again, move away from just doing strict review content and start doing stuff that's a little bit more editorial. Hopefully not nearly as long-winded as this one. Let me know what you thought of this video. Please like, subscribe, all that good shit, comment, and make sure that you go down into the description and check out this new mix for yourself. It's my ongoing series called A Little Bit of Everything, and it runs the gamut of jazz, funk, soul, and a bit of hip-hop. There's a nice selection from, I feel like, of old school and old school and new school. Let me know what you think of the mix too. All right, thank you very much. And yeah, I still can't finish these videos, so see you on the other side.